If the Seattle Kraken, Ron Francis, and their new head coach are as good at building a team as they are at keeping secrets, then this team is definitely winning a Stanley Cup. What's cracking, everybody? And yes, that's right, we finally have the answer to one of the biggest questions, and certainly one of the most anticipated ones since the team announced their name just about a year ago in who was going to be the first head coach. After what was really a multi-year saga that had its fair share of twists and turns, especially over the last year, with all sorts of different names heading it up, like Gerard Gallant, Peter Laviolette, and most recently Rick Tocchet, we finally got an answer that it will be Dave Hakstol that will be the Kraken's first head coach. And it's certainly a name that not many people saw coming, if anybody. With Seattle clearly willing to take its time to make this hire, it started to draw more and more eyes across the hockey world, especially recently as names started coming off of the board with guys signing new contracts or signing extensions to their current ones. But as that list of possibilities continued to get smaller, new names would rise to the top as a new potential favorite to end up getting the job. But nobody was really even talking about Dave Hakstol, and certainly not as a favorite for the job, which is especially impressive considering that he now comes to Seattle from Toronto, where over the last couple of years he has served as an assistant head coach, largely in charge of their defense and penalty kill. And honestly, I think this is a pretty good hire for the Kraken. Yes, it's not necessarily the one that we expected, and really isn't even a name that we had talked about up until this point as a possibility, but he does check a lot of the boxes that Seattle said they were looking for in their first head coach, and in the end, regardless of who it was going to be, only time will really tell whether or not it will end up working out. But for now, let's see what Dave Hakstol brings to the table for the Kraken. Now, like I just said, he's coming from Toronto, where he's spent the last couple of seasons as an assistant head coach, again, mostly in charge of their defense and penalty kill. As far as how that's gone, well, you can make an argument either that it's gone pretty well or not so great depending on what stats you look at, but for the most part, probably it lands with somewhat alright, as it's been largely average on the defensive end for the Maple Leafs over the last couple of seasons, though it does have to be said that that is at least a noticeable improvement from where they were before he got there. So regardless of whether or not Toronto's been a shining jewel of defense over the last couple of years, which they certainly haven't been, it still does seem to be valuable experience from what is still a fairly young team that is hoping to be on the rise, regardless of how frustrating things have been over the last couple of years for that fan base, at least in the playoffs anyway. Of course, one of the few things that Ron Francis did emphasize throughout this search for a head coach was the fact that Seattle was likely going to end up going with somebody that at least had some experience head coaching at the NHL level. And for Hakstol, that comes in his time before he was with the Maple Leafs, where he was the head coach of the Philadelphia Flyers for 3 seasons between 2015 and 2018. And things started off for him pretty well in Philadelphia, where in 2015, he became the first guy since 1982 to be hired directly from college into a head coaching role in the NHL. And in that first season, he took the Flyers all the way to the playoffs on a 41-win season, although they did enter as an 8 seed and would fall in the first round to the Capitals in 6 games. But as you're probably well aware, the last few years for the Flyers have been a little bit up and down, and that definitely started here, as the next season they would just barely miss the playoffs, winning 39 games, but then would be back in the playoffs in 2018, though again would fall in the first round, this time to their cross-state rival in the Pittsburgh Penguins, again in 6 games. Then, after a not particularly promising start over the first couple of months of the 2018-19 season, Hakstol would eventually be let go in December of that season. So in the end, his time with the Flyers also certainly had its ups and downs, and was, on the whole, I guess pretty alright, with a 134, 101, and 42 record by the end of it, again going to the playoffs in 2 of 3 years, but exiting in the first round both times. But it's the role that he served before his time with the Flyers that got him that job, and likely played a pretty big role in getting him this one with the Kraken, where for 11 years he was the head coach of the University of North Dakota men's hockey team. In that time, North Dakota, who was already a pretty good team before he came to them in 2004, went to 11 straight NCAA tournaments and 4 times appeared in the Final Four, or the Frozen Four as it's known. And even outside of the accolades that himself and the team as a whole were able to accomplish and achieve in those 11 years with him as the head coach, on top of sending a number of players to the NHL, notably TJ Oshie and Jonathan Toews, this is also experience that Ron Francis was sure to point to in the press conference as being pretty important in why he was considered for the role, considering that, again, with it being college, this is a roster that sees a lot of turnover with guys graduating certainly within 4 years, if not leaving sooner for the NHL. So he definitely had a lot of different rosters and a lot of different players that he had to get to work together to continue to be successful year over year, which again is definitely going to be valuable experience when it comes to putting a brand new team together for the very first time, with mostly guys that have never played together. And those 11 years of experience certainly, at the very least, help build the foundation for the reputation that he has earned of being particularly good at communicating and especially working with developing younger players, which could start to kind of tip the hand a little bit of where the Kraken could be looking in the expansion draft. Now, we've already talked about the possibility and likelihood that this team might go more for the younger end in the expansion draft and look to at least get a couple of veterans, but largely build for a strong future, even if it doesn't necessarily manifest itself in the first year. And hiring a guy like this with a reputation for working with younger players certainly would point to the fact that Seattle is looking to go pretty young in the expansion draft, and also probably won't be trading away too many draft picks and looking to add a number of guys through entry drafts over the next few years as well. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be one of the 3 youngest teams in the NHL after the expansion draft, like I had them being in my mock draft, but hiring a guy with the kind of reputation of working with younger players like Hakstol has definitely does point in that direction. Now, a few other things that were mentioned in the press conference introducing Hakstol as the head coach this morning that they were looking for when making this hire was somebody that was particularly good at communicating, which we've already talked about Hakstol having. On top of that, Ron Francis particularly mentioned having somebody that had a breadth of experience, or as he put it, particularly good hockey acumen, which is where that variety of experience that Hakstol has would come in. From being a college head coach at a successful organization, being an NHL coach for a few years, and also having the experience of what it looks like being an assistant head coach, which Hakstol himself said definitely does give you a whole new perspective on the whole NHL system and how things run, as well as gives you a different type of interaction with players. A couple of other things of note that they mentioned specifically, especially when it comes to looking for players, was that they're going to be looking for guys with strong character that show resiliency, which probably means no to guys like Tony DeAngelo, but you never really know. He also mentioned that when it comes to analytics, considering Seattle has built out a pretty strong analytics department, and also that Hakstol is coming from Toronto, which has a pretty strong analytics department of their own, is that while this is a pretty important tool that should definitely be a part of getting players and scouting, it's not the only piece of the puzzle, and this is still a human game with a lot of emotion. So again, while it's an important piece of the puzzle, it's certainly not the only thing that you have to consider when getting those guys. So ultimately, it seems like Hakstol is a pretty good hire for the type of team that Seattle is trying to build. Whether or not it ends up working out in the long run, we're just going to have to wait and see. And if you are concerned about the fact that he doesn't necessarily have a ton of experience when it comes to winning at the highest level in the NHL, like some of the other guys that were available as potential hires for the first head coach, well, he wouldn't be the first guy that didn't have a ton of success in his first stint head coaching in the NHL that then found it in his second stint. Just for some examples, Chris Peters pointed out Mike Sullivan, Bruce Cassidy, and Pete DeBoer, so there definitely is some precedent for guys having success in their second location. Plus, as far as Seattle fans are concerned, we've seen a similar thing take place with Pete Carroll after he had a less than stellar first stint in the NFL as a head coach, but has done pretty well with the Seahawks. Not that that necessarily translates directly to the NHL, but it does show that even when it comes to coaching, sometimes failure can be the greatest teacher, and you do find success sometimes in that second chance. Meanwhile, outside of the guys that are going to be on or behind the bench for the Kraken, which we're just going to have to wait and see who the rest of that is going to be, the other piece of news that we got from the Kraken recently was the announcement of JT Brown as their color guy for the TV side, where he'll be working alongside John Forsland. As far as experience is concerned here and what Brown can bring to the TV broadcast for the Kraken, well, for that we are completely just going to have to wait and see, as this is the first time he's served full-time in a role like this one. He did also, at the same time he announced he was coming to Seattle to be their TV color guy, announce his retirement from the NHL, where he played 7 seasons, mostly for the Tampa Bay Lightning, but most recently in the 2018-19 season playing for the Minnesota Wild. So sure, he doesn't necessarily have a ton of experience, at least that we know about, in this type of a role, but he'll be next to a guy in the booth in John Forsland who has plenty to share, so I'm sure it'll end up working out. Plus, personally, I really like this hire because he is another hire by the Kraken of somebody that has shown throughout his life to be particularly good at being involved in the community, and in particular being involved with kind of race relation type of stuff and bringing more diversity to the game of hockey, which is already something that the Kraken have talked about a number of times when it comes to their off-of-the-ice focuses, and this is just more proof that that is definitely something that they are thinking about and looking to build long-term. So, at least personally, I'm excited to see what Brown brings to those TV broadcasts, especially if Root gets that streaming thing set up like we talked about them potentially doing, and also what he adds to the hockey community of Seattle. Otherwise, that will bring us to the end of this one, so thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the hiring of Dave Hakstol as the head coach, or even JT Brown if you want to share those as well down in the comment section. Otherwise, stay safe out there and be good to each other. Peace.